Welcome to part 8 of our biological basis of behavior. What we're going to be talking about today is the peripheral nervous system. So at this point, we've gone through everything in the central nervous system, which is really just the brain and the spinal cord. Now what we're going to talk about is the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system is really going to act as the wiring system for our body, for our nervous system. So again, we've got our, if we think about kind of like our brain and the spinal cord as the kind of like control center, or if you want to like use a computer as an analogy, right? It's like all of the internal processing of that computer. It's all of the decision making. It's deciding on everything. It's going through projects. It's making things happen. The peripheral nervous system is all of the other wiring. So the wiring that's taking information to like the mouse and the keyboard and the screen of a computer, or like throughout our bodies, in our, our body example, right? If we want to think about our bodies, that's what we're talking about. So it's our wiring system. It's running all of the information around. So again, its main job is going to be just like that, right? It's going to be transporting information to and from the central nervous system. So one of the things that it's doing is it's collecting information in other places. Again, if you want to use that computer analogy, right, when you type on your keyboard, that information has to get from your keyboard and be taken to, right, the main central processing of the computer, right? Same thing with the mouse. When you click your mouse, that information has to get to that main piece. So our bodies work the same basically, where, when you touch something with your hands or you hear something with your ears, right, information has to be collected and then transported to the brain. So that's what the peripheral nervous system is going to do. In addition, information now needs to be sent back out to, right, those parts of your body. So when you touch something and it's hot, that information has to get sent from your hand to your central nervous system. Your central nervous system then has to send information back to your hand and your arm to move away because it's hot. All right, now our peripheral nervous system can be broken down into two main components, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Now we're going to talk about both of these in just a moment. So again, we have this little chart. This was one of the first things I showed you guys at the very beginning. I think it was in our first video on the nervous system. And it's kind of the breakdown of our nervous system in general. So again, we've already talked a whole lot about our central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. Now what we want to talk about is the peripheral nervous system. And again, you can see these nerves running all across our body. So like I just mentioned, you can break this into two groups. We have our autonomic nervous system and our somatic nervous system. Now, our autonomic nervous system is communicating with internal organs and glands. Internal organs and glands. Now, we can also break that into two separate divisions that we'll talk about as well. The sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The sympathetic division is about arousing, right? Waking our body up, getting us moving. Our parasympathetic division is about calming us down, right? Once we have, like, let's say, for an example, adrenaline rushing through our bodies and our heart is beating really quickly and our muscles are tensing and we're getting ready to act, right? We also have to then eventually calm down. So our parasympathetic division is going to be the calming side. So arousing, calming. Again, we'll talk about those a little bit more as we go. Our somatic nervous system now is going to be communicating with our sense organs and voluntary muscles. Sense organs and voluntary muscles. We can break this up into two groups as well, the sensory or afferent nervous system and the motor or efferent nervous system. The sensory, and these ones should hopefully be pretty easy to tell what they're doing, right? Sensory nervous system is about sensory input. It's collecting information and taking it back to the central nervous system. Our motor nervous system, right, the efferent side, is going to be doing the motor output. So when our brain tells our body to move, that's going to be the motor nervous system. Okay. Now to try and remember afferent and efferent, right? You can think of the effort is motor, right? When you're putting in effort, right, you are physically moving. So efferent is the motor side, and then afferent is going to be sensing. And we'll talk about some examples for these ones as well and how to kind of try and remember them as well. So let's talk about them a little more in depth here. So first, we're going to look at the somatic nervous system, which is what we were just talking about. So again, it is going to control voluntary skeletal muscle movement as well as sensation. Right? So there's two different pieces that are going on here. Now, again, what it's really doing is it's collecting information from our senses, especially like our skin, our bone, our muscle senses, right? Because there are senses, not as many necessarily, but in like our muscles, for example, which is why if you pull a muscle, it hurts, right? There's still senses going on in there. There's still nerves in there that are collecting information. So it's collecting information from the outside world and from our muscles, right? And then carrying that information to our central nervous system. And again, our central nervous system is carrying it out to then move those muscles around. So every time you move something, that is our efferent nervous system. So it's part of somatic, right? We know it's efferent, again, because you are putting in physical effort. When we are sensing something, it is the afferent. Next, we're going to talk about the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, like we mentioned before, is going to control our internal organ functions. So it's going to be involved and in charge of making sure that our glands are doing what they need to do. So something like sweating would be glandular activity. It's also going to be involved in our heartbeat, so making sure that our heart is actually beating right. Again, that's something we don't necessarily have conscious control over. We can influence it, but not like breathing where we can just hold our breath. So it's going to control our heartbeat. It's also going to be in control of digestion. Now notice, autonomic, right, is all things that are happening on their own. So a nice really way to remember autonomic versus somatic is that autonomic is automatic. Okay, the autonomic nervous system is doing things automatically. We don't consciously think about these things. It just does them on its own. Okay, it's taken care of. Now, and again, this is kind of that second bullet point, right? So they can be consciously overridden, but most of the time they're going to function on its own, right? So an example is like, we don't really talk about this much, but biofeedback is an example. So we've done tests where you can consciously increase or decrease your heartbeat, right? If we give you a way to basically hear your own heartbeat or see your own heartbeat, you can, by consciously thinking about it, slow it down or speed it up. So we can override these, but 99% of the time your heart's just beating, right? It's just doing it on its own. You don't tell it to beat faster, it just does. You don't tell it to slow down, it just does. So although there can be a little bit of a conscious component, most of it is, again, automatic. So autonomic is automatic. We can, again, break this down, and I'll show you this a little bit more in depth on the other side, to our sympathetic and our parasympathetic, our arousing and calming. So let's go right here. So parasympathetic versus sympathetic. Right now, again, these are basically having opposite functions. So our parasympathetic is going to calm us down and conserve our energy. Our sympathetic nervous system is going to be arousing us, waking us up, and expending energy. Okay? So our sympathetic nervous system is going to be doing things like accelerating our heartbeat, raising our blood pressure, cooling us with perspiration. Now, one thing it does that's a little different is it's going to slow digestion. Digestion is kind of the oddball of all of these things that are going on, where digestion is not going to happen when we're active. It is going to happen when we're inactive. Okay? So again, if you think about like when you're competing in a sport or you're running or you're scared, something frightens you, right? Your heartbeat is going to speed up, your blood pressure is going to raise, you're going to sweat a little bit, your muscles are going to tense, right? Those are all things that are part of the sympathetic nervous system. And really what they're all doing is getting us ready for fight or flight, right? So it's things that are happening, again, automatically to prepare us. And here we are being aroused, and we are then going to expend energy. Well, actually, let's talk about the other side first, and then I'll give you guys a way to remember it. Our other side is the parasympathetic. So sympathetic, parasympathetic, you can think of them as opposites. So one of them is waking us up. The other one is going to calm us. It's going to conserve energy. So once we've dealt with whatever it is that has put us in this, aroused state, right? Now we're going to basically need to calm down. So this is going to start calming us down and conserving our energy. It's as opposed to fight or flight, it is rest and digest. So again, it's slowing our heartbeat down, it's going to contract our pupils, and one thing that's really important is it's going to actually stimulate digestion. So again, digestion is kind of the weird thing where it works opposite, where when we are in like danger or we're expending a lot of energy, our digestion is going to stop. When we are calm, our digestion is going to start. Kind of two ways you can see this. So one example is like if anybody is like runs cross country or runs long distance, or you've ever watched like long distance runners, one of the things you'll notice is like for like a marathon, people eat like as they run, right? They eat and they drink as they run. Now, part of this is just to get more energy, but sometimes what happens is you'll see somebody and they'll like run past the thing and they'll get like water or they'll get like one of those little goo things or whatever, and they eat or they drink something, and then you'll see people like immediately throw it back up, right? And what's actually happening there is when you run, like we mentioned before, our digestion is actually shutting down. So one of the reasons that people eat and drink, why they do it, is to try and keep their digestion going a little bit so they can try and add more energy as they go. But if my digestive system basically stops, right, or gets to a point where it's moving really slowly, and then I try to eat or drink something, my body just kicks it out because I'm not doing anything with it. So that's why we see that sometimes. Now, an example that might be a little more applicable and a little more like connects to everybody, right, is when you eat like a really big meal. A good example, and there's other factors of this because of what we're eating, but like a really good example is like Thanksgiving or Christmas or holidays where you eat a lot, right? And basically what happens after you eat that huge meal is you eat that huge meal and you get tired, right? And you want to go lay down, or like if you eat breakfast and you have a huge breakfast, you have to like go take a nap or relax, right? Again, what's happening here is when we are resting is also when we're digesting. So when we eat a lot of food and we feel super full, right, we get this need to relax and rest because then we will start digesting that food. This right here is just a like, whoops, I just moved it all. Can I move my camera, please? Thank you. I don't know if I can fit anywhere. Okay, well, I'm just gonna put myself right in the middle then. So again, if you like look at each side, let's look at maybe sympathetic first. So we look at our sympathetic, we've got all these different kind of parts of our body. Again, these are all things going to happen when we are needing to expend energy. So we're dilating pupils, we're inhibiting salivation, we're increasing our heartbeat, right? And then again, on the other side, our parasympathetic, right? We are going to contract those pupils, we're going to stimulate salivation, we're going to slow our heartbeat, we're going to constrict our airways, right? Everything is going to relax, okay? So aroused versus relaxed. Again, and actually maybe let me go back really quick. I forgot to mention, so the way to think about this, or maybe a way to remember it, is sympathetic, right? If you're sympathetic to someone, you're like experiencing what they're experiencing, right? So to try and kind of maybe remember this a little bit, right? When you are, like if someone's really, really sad and you start feeling that, right? You become more... Like one example of arousal is sadness, actually, right? Like when you're crying really hard, like your heart's beating and there's a lot going on, right? That's our sympathetic side, right? When I'm feeling sympathetic, I'm having this aroused emotion, right? I'm expending energy. And then again, if I can remember sympathetic, I can remember that parasympathetic is the opposite. All right. There is a coloring page for the peripheral nervous system. I believe it actually looks a lot like that last slide where it's breaking down the different parts of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You can go through and just kind of label those pieces and color that section in. And then when you complete that, please again go ahead and do a quick summary to just kind of wrap up our peripheral nervous system.